All right, so today we are looking at public expenditure analysis. This will be the last video for public finance one. All right, so these are the key topics that we'll cover in this video. We'll look at public expenditure and the typology, then the development models of public expenditure. So we'll look at Wagner's law, look at Peacock Weissman's analysis of public expenditure, then the Musgrave, and then the Rostow model of development. So these are the development models concerning public expenditure that we'll look at. Then briefly, we'll look at the functional forms and then the empirical evidence to support these development models. And then also we'll look at the causes of public expenditure growth in developing countries such as So when we talk about public expenditure, we are just talking about the cost of carrying out any government project. So the government will have to step in the market to correct the market failure. So it has to come in and produce those public goods that we already know. So in the attempts of the government to produce this public goods, these goods and services that are needed by the citizens of the country, what are the costs that are involved? So the costs that the government incurs before it's able to produce these goods and services is what we call the public expenditure. Okay, so this expenditure can be stated in absolute terms. For example, it can be said that maybe the year 2021 public expenditure was maybe 2,000 Ghana cedis, or it can also be stated as a percentage of GDP. So maybe out of our GDP, our total expenditure is taking up like maybe 25% of our GDP. So these are the main ways that public expenditure can be expressed or stated. And also at times they express it in terms of its contribution or the sectoral contribution to the economy. So you take something like health. What is the amount of money that went into the health sector? If you take education, what is the amount of money that went into the educational sector? Infrastructure development, what is the amount of? So we can use this also to express public expenditure. Okay, we can use the sectorial contribution to also express public expenditure. All right, now let's look at the principles of expenditure analysis. Now, when we talk about principles of expenditure analysis, we are just looking at how we use economic theory to examine the consequences, the effects of government expenditure. So the government is spending on infrastructure, health, education, agriculture. What are the effects? What are the consequences of these spendings? So that is what the principles of expenditure analysis is about. Now, in any expenditure program, these are the effects that the economy, gets from government spending or government expenditure. We have the allocation effects, the redistribution effect, then the stabilization effect. At times they do add the regulatory role that government spending also plays in the economy. So first, let's look at the allocation effects. The government is spending, and we are saying that one of the effects of that spending is allocation effect. What it means is that after the government has spent, okay, after the government has incurred all this cost, will this program, will this expenditure affect the pattern of production in the economy? The government is embarking on projects that require funding. So after these projects, after the government has funded all this, is it actually going to change the pattern of production in the economy? For example, there's a subsidy, there's a government subsidy. Subsidies can benefit firms. It can also benefit consumers. So if the government is imposing a subsidy on goods and then services, is it actually going to reduce the cost of production so that the firms can produce more, or is it just targeting consumers so that the consumers can actually buy more of these goods and services just to increase consumption level? So whenever government spends, we are just using that spending to analyze how the spending or the expenditure is going to affect consumption and then production patterns in the economy. So that is the allocation effect. After the spending, what effect do we have on consumption and production? Okay. Then for the redistribution effect. Now, this one too, after the spending program, after the government expenditure, okay, how does it affect income distribution? Okay, are we taking money from the poor? Are we giving it to the rich, or what exactly is happening after the expenditure? Okay, so this effect is basically concerned about after the government spending, who or which group of people are benefiting and which ones are losing in terms of income. Okay, so if you take something like this, school feeding, they were trying to help the poor. Okay, free uniforms and all that. So if we have to pay taxes, they are assuming that we are taking the taxes from the rich and then we are giving it to the poor. So if you take this example, then it means that the rich is losing in terms of money and then the poor is gaining in terms of money. So that is the redistribution effect, the effect on income distribution of any government expenditure. And then the stabilization effect too talks about how government uses its spending to control certain key macro economic variables. Okay, how do we use the government spend after the government has spent? What is the effect on the output level? Is it going to cause an increase? Is it going to cause a decrease? How do we use government expenditure to stabilize for price? Okay, when we have persistent inflation, prices are continuously moving up. How do we use government expenditure to actually curb that? So we take the stabilization effect as how government expenditure affects these economic variables. Okay. All right. So those are the principles of government expenditure analysis. Let's look at types of expenditure. Okay. So the expenditure can be categorized into exhaustive and transfers, or expenditure on non-marketed goods and then the marketed goods. Okay. If you take exhaustives, these ones are the expenditure that we incur on the acquisition of inputs. So the government will have to produce public goods. In its quest to get the inputs to produce these goods, the cost that it incurs on those inputs is what we call the exhaustive expenditure. But for transfers were expenditure, but those ones we don't actually get any economic rise on any society's resources. Okay, so these ones are not something that we now say that the government has used its money to purchase this or that. Subsidy is a transfer. Here, if I'm going to buy a good and the government subsidizes it, the government doesn't get any particular resource that this is what we use the money for. It's just increasing the societal welfare of the people. So that's for exhaustive expenditure and then the transfers. And then for non-marketed goods and marketed goods, a good is marketed if it is produced by the private sector or by the free economy. The market is able to produce those goods. So the non-marketed goods are the ones that the market normally fails to produce, what we term as the public goods. So when the government spends on the production of such public goods like roads, schools, hospitals, bridges, and the like, then all those costs, the expenditure incurred on these ones, we call them expenditure on non-marketed goods, and the ones on the marketed goods too are the expenditure on marketed goods. Okay, then for the types of expenditure too, we have the discretionary expenditure and then the statutory expenditure. Okay, for discretionary expenditure, these ones are not expenditure that are backed by law. It is not compulsory for the government to spend this one. So the amount of money that the government spends on such expenditure depends on their own discretion. Okay, they use their own value judgment whether they need to spend more or spend less. Okay, so those ones are not backed by law. It's not compulsory for the government to spend it. So such expenditures are emoluments, administration, the cost of the government administration, it is not backed by law. So the quantum of resources that they use for those expenditure is based on their own discretion. Then services, investment, government investment, and all that. It is not compulsory. It is not something that is backed by law for the government to invest a particular amount of money. So that one, the expenditure depends on the government in power. So those ones are called the discretionary expenditure. And then for the statutory expenditure, those ones are compulsory. They are supposed to be undertaken by the government because it is backed by law. Okay, they are supposed to do so. The government is supposed to do so. So it doesn't matter the government, it doesn't matter their value judgment. This is what is required of them. And examples are transfers to the district assembly common fund, the GET fund, national health levy, the road fund, and all that. So those ones, periodically, it is compulsory for the government to send some funds to support those activities. So those ones are compulsory because they are backed by law. Okay. All right, so there's just data on the discretionary and then the statutory payments. All right, let's look at the models of government expenditure growth. Okay, this growth models are grouped into macro models and then the micro models. Basically, for the macro ones, they try to study the long-term growth in public expenditure. So over the years, how or what is the trend of public expenditure? How is it going? Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? Is there a particular growth trend? That is the macro models. They try to explain that. But the micro ones, they try to just explain changes in some of the components of public expenditure. Okay, so those ones are not interested in the long-term growth. They are just interested in how changes in some of the components of the government expenditure can even affect the economy. Okay, that's why we call them the micro models. All right, so the models that we'll be looking at is the Wagner's law model. Then we'll look at the development model by Musgrave and Rostow, and then the displacement model by Peacock and Weissman. So these are the three models that we'll look at. So let's start with the Wagner's law. Adolf Wagner was a German political economist. So he propounded the Wagner's law. Okay, so the hypothesis is called Wagner's hypothesis of increased government activity. What actually caused government expenditure to increase over time? Okay, so according to the model, he used both relative growth and absolute growth in public expenditure. Okay, so during the trying to study the causes of growth in public expenditure, he could use maybe just the raw government spending or the government spending as a ratio of something, or with this cause from maybe the GDP or the income of the country. You can just use the absolute value of those variables or the ratio of those ones to other variables. When we look at the functional forms, we will understand what we're talking about here. So now, because of using these measures, the law states that as per capita income increases, also does government expenditure. So if you have an economy and there is a rise in the per capita income, the income per head of the people in the country, then we expect government spending to also increase. Okay, to also increase. So what this means is that there's a positive expenditure elasticity. Okay, when we talk about expenditure elasticity, we are talking about the percentage change in government expenditure. Okay, as a result of a percentage change in the national income of the country. So when national income changes by 1%, what is going to be the percentage change in government spending? That is what the expenditure elasticity measures. So these are some of the functional forms, okay, for describing the Wagner's law or the Wagner's model. At times, there's no single way of expressing it. Some express total government expenditure as a function of GDP. Some too can express government expenditure per GDP as a function of per capita income or GDP per the total number of people. Some too they express government expenditure as a function of GDP per the number of people per head. Okay, so all these are some of the functional forms that the Wagner's law takes. Okay, we don't have a particular consistent model that is used in literature. Okay, all right. Now, according to Wagner, he realized that public expenditure, okay, in terms of a share from gross domestic product was increasing, okay, over time. So, if you take the GDP of the country, what is the proportion of that GDP that the government is spending on the provision of public goods? Okay, and now, so he wanted to know the reasons why there's this sharp increase in government spending, and he attributed this increase to these three reasons. The first one is because of industrialization and modernization. Now we are putting up a lot of industries. We are living in a modernized world, and as a result, there is increase in the production of various goods and then services. Okay, and because of that, we have externalities. The market will be failing, and I'm sure we remember what externalities are. So we have a lot of industries in the economy now. They are producing and they are causing negative externalities. Some are causing positive externalities and all that. So the government will have to intervene to correct this market failure, as we know. And as the government is intervening, it means that it has to be incurring more costs. It has to be spending more. It has to be spending more on these intervention programs, and that is causing an increase in its expenditure. And because of the modernized world that we are living in, the government also has to spend on imposing laws just to maintain order in the country. They are supposed to be legal structure so that it can contain this modernization. So this is one reason why there was an increase in government spending as a fraction of GDP. Okay, and another reason is the growth in real income. There's economic growth. There's generally increasing the world's income, and we assume that the demand for public goods are income elastic. Being income elastic means that there's a positive relationship between our income and then the demand for public goods. If we want, whenever our income increases, we prefer getting more public goods. So whenever there's a growth in real income, our incomes are increasing, and as a result, the government will have to produce more goods and services to meet the demand for those goods. Okay, so growth in real income is also another cause of the increase in government spending. And then development and change in technology. And now, because of technology, we have natural monopolies that are always trying to squeeze the market and all that. So the government will have to come in. You know the effect of monopolies. They always try to get higher profits, and it also leads to market failure. So the government will have to at times even take over this natural monopolies and produce the goods and services itself by itself, just to enhance economic efficiency. So by doing so, it causes an increase in the expenditure. Okay, causes an increase in the expenditure. All right, so this is the Wagner's law. The driving forces in the increase in government spending is industrialization, increasing income, and then the social progress when there is development and then technological change. So as per capital income rise in industrial countries, their public sectors grow in relative importance. So we need the government, the provision of public goods whenever the country becomes industrialized, or the income elasticity of public services is greater than 1. Okay, so we have a very positive and a very high income elasticity of public goods. Okay, so whenever there's an increase in income, we want more public goods, so the government will have to spend more on those ones. Okay, people have to go to school, go to better hospitals and all that, because now they have more money. So the government has to make sure that there's a provision of all those ones. Okay, so this is just a summary of the causes and the effect. The effect of the cause of the increase in government spending can be attributed to industrialization, change in income, social progress. And because of this, the economy is now becoming more complex. Okay, so we need more assistance from the government in the banking sector, law and order, and all those things. And then urbanization and change in population density causes congestion. So the government will have to come in, set in some measures just to make sure that all those the congestions are taken care of. Urban sanitation and all that. So because of congestion, the government also have to spend on urban sanitation and all that. So all these ones cause increase in government spending. So there's just a summary of the causes and then the effects, the direct effects of the causes and then the effect on government spending as well. All right, testing Wagner's law. Now, the income elasticity is, as I said, percentage change in government spending as a result of percentage change here. They are using the per capita income, so GDP per capita. Using differential calculus, if you want to find elasticity, is dealing J over dealing Y. Okay, so percentage change in J over percentage change in Y. Now, there are two versions to this law, to the elasticity. For the absolute version, they assume that the income elasticity of government spending is greater than 0. It is a normal good. So whenever income increases, we expect an increase in the government expenditure. But the relative version is saying that even the elasticity is even greater. It is greater than 1. Okay, which makes it a superior good. Okay, which makes it a superior good. Now, this is a time series regression model on government spending as against the GDP per capita. So this year, the income elasticity here is going to measure the percentage change in government spending as a result of percentage change in per capita income. So assuming we have 20 here, okay, then assume the elasticity here is like 0.5, then it will mean that if GDP per capita should increase by say 1%, then we should see government spending maybe increasing by whatever value that we have here in percentage terms. Okay, so that is what the econometric model talks about. Okay, it's time series because we are looking at the growth in government spending, so it has to be data studied over time. Okay, data studied over time. Now, as we saw the two versions, the absolute version saying that the good is a normal good, and then the relative ones saying that the good is a superior good. Now, the absolute version based on data has more support than the relative version, which suggests that the public goods do have the public goods or the expenditure that the government spends on these goods is positively related to the income, the per capita income in the country. Okay, and it being a normal good, okay, which means that we see public spending as a normal good. Okay, we see public spending as a normal good. So whenever there are increasing incomes, we should see an increase in government spending as well. But for the relative one, some of the studies get elasticity to be even less than 1. Okay, which violates what the theory states, that is supposed to be greater than 0. And even those that normally get higher ones, the ones that are almost like 1, they normally suffer from model misspecification. They don't specify the econometric models well. When it happens like that, we see the answers that they get will not be robust. To those who are doing econometrics, I'm sure you will understand these ones. Okay. All right, now we look at causes of public expenditure growth in developing countries. What are the individual causes of this increase in government spending? So the first one is growth of per capita income. As we saw, whenever there's an increase in per capita income, there's pressure on the demand for public goods. So the government will have to step in and produce more goods, which will cause an increase in the expenditure, government expenditure. And then the Angel's Law. Now, the Angel's Law, what it means is that when people are getting a lot of money, there's a reduction in the percentage of their income that they spend on food. If you get a lot of money, for food, we don't normally change the quantity of food that we eat much. So assuming you were having 100 cedis and you were spending 10 Ghana, that would be 10% of your income that you were spending on food. Now your income has increased to 200, so now you are using 15. Okay, you are using 15 cedis. That is like 7.5%. So you see that as your income is increasing, the percentage of your income that you are spending on food is decreasing. And food is a private good. Okay, so if as your income is increasing, you are reducing the percentage of the income that you spend on food. It means that the income elasticity, okay, of the demand for your food or the private good is going to be lower than that of the elasticity of demand for the public good. So your income is increasing in percentage wise, but the increase in your demand for food, which is a private good, is lower. So that of the elasticity for the public good is going to be higher than that of the private good, as food being taken as an example. So it means that as the income is increasing, we need more of public goods than what we need for the private goods. So that will mean that the government will have to produce more goods to meet the demands of the citizens of the country. Okay, so that's one cause of increasing expenditure in developing countries. And then the provision of capital goods by the government, provision of social infrastructure, schools, buildings, and all that. When the economy is trying to develop, the economy will need these things for development. Roads, good roads to transport, to produce goods and services. Okay, so as the economy is at the early stages of development, they tend to engage in provision of more capital goods, and the government will have to do that, and that causes increase in government expenditure. And then population growth. Okay, as the number is increasing, I mean, when Ghana was around 9 million, we didn't need a lot of hospitals, but now we are more than 30 million, and as a result, we need more hospitals, we need schools and all that. So as the economy is growing, we will have to spend more. Okay, and the structural changes in the economy. Initially, even if you go to the agricultural sector, we're using crude ways of doing things, but now because of industrialization, we need to put up more infrastructure. Now we are moving up the technology ladder, and that one too comes with a cost, and the government will have to bear all that. And then the growth in public expenditure can also be attributed to the political ideology of the country. If the country is interested in increasing societal welfare, then they will have to be spending more on that, spending more on the provision of goods that will increase welfare. But if the country is not interested in that, then welfare without respect and expenditure without respect is going to be lower. Okay, and then the political process or governance. You take countries that are practicing democracy. So you see how expensive it is. Even so, I was talking about the political process and countries practicing democracy. They tend to spend a lot on elections. You see, they have to conduct district elections, parliament, the elections for the MPs. They have to conduct general ones for the presidency as well, and although those things come with a huge cost. So when the political process of the state involves democracy, it normally comes with a huge cost, and that one too forms part of the government expenditure. And then increased in public sector activities. Now the government is owing a lot of businesses, enterprises, and all that, and it has to hire people, hire labor. The government has to pay them. So there is an increase in the wage bill that is also causing an increase in the government spend, and of course corruption. Okay, even if the government is supposed to spend 10, someone will say it is spending 20 so that it pockets the additional 10. That one too is causing an increase in government spending. All right. Now, per empirical evidence, the Wagner's law has been tested, and according to some literature, it holds for more than 100 years. So they gathered the time series data over a span of 100 years, and they saw that yes, there was an increase in the government expenditure, and it was attributed to the factors that we have discussed. Except except that more recently, the new econometric models that are coming up and all that, those are the ones that are finding some issues with the potency of the law. But initially, they tested it and everything was fine. So this is for the Wagner's law. Then let's look at the development model by Musgrave and then Rostow. Musgrave was an economist. Rostow was an economic historian. According to them, the growth in public expenditure might be related to the pattern of economic growth and development in society. So the level of expenditure depends on the stage of development of that particular state. Okay, so as the economy is going through the different developmental phases, then there are changes in the expenditure as well. So according to them, development was through the process of industrialization. So as the economy of the states begins to industrialize, there are some level of expenditure. When it gets to the middle phase, there's some level, and as it is getting to the high phase too, there's a different level of expenditure. So these are the stages in the development process. The early stage. Now, when the economy is beginning to develop, that is where it needs a lot of infrastructural development. So the government will have to spend much on infrastructure, education, roads, electricity. I mean, all those things. The government will have to spend much on them. Now, at the early stage of development, individuals do not save much. So private savings won't be able to help the private sector to produce all the goods and all the infrastructure that is needed. I mean, the state wasn't developed. So, I mean, people wouldn't actually be saving. So even if they have to produce or provide this infrastructural facilities, they cannot do that. So the government will have to step in and take charge of all this. Okay, so this is also the stage where people try to move from the rural sectors and they move into the urban areas. So at the early stage, public expenditure tends to be very, very high. Okay, Now, when you get to the middle stage here, at least there's been an increase in private savings. So they will also support in infrastructural facility, the provision of these infrastructural facilities, which means that public expenditure is going to fall a bit. It wouldn't be as high as the initial expenditure. Okay, but this is the stage where now we have industrialization as well. So there's going to be externalities. Okay, people are coming to the urban centers. They will be having urban crimes, pollution, and all that. So here too, at least the government will have to step in and then take charge of all this, correct the externalities and all that. So here, the government expenditure wouldn't be concentrated much on the provision of infrastructural facilities, but correcting externalities. Okay, so at the early stage, it was just about infrastructure, but here, because of an increase in private spending, private savings, the government can now shift its attention from provision of infrastructure goods to the control of externalities. And then the last stage, the developed stage. Here, the society will now have high incomes. Okay, there will be an increase in the demand for private goods. And as we are demanding more private goods, we will demand more public goods as well. Assuming we are now demanding for a lot of goods, the goods are not only produced in one center and sold in another center. So the goods will have to be transported. We will need good roads. So as we are demanding for more private goods, then we need those public goods as well. Okay, and then the government will have to be spending on how to correct income inequality, ensure equity, because now the state is more advanced. People are doing this and that. People are getting more money. Others are living in poverty and also it has to be enacting laws to make sure that it's directing some of the resources from the rich to the poor. So it goes through those transfer payments, subsidies, and free SHS and all those things. Okay, so that is the developed stage. Okay, that is the developed stage. So that is for the development model. The last one is the displacement hypothesis by Peacock and Weissman. According to them, government spending evolves in a step-like pattern. So it moves up, 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 where each step coincides with the social upheaval. So the perfect example he gave was wars. When there are wars, we see an increase in government spending. Let's take this Russia Ukraine war. You cannot imagine the amount of money that Putin has invested into this. See, because of the war, there's supposed to be increase in government expenditure, which also means that there's going to be increase in taxes. You have to pay tax to finance all this. So that is what Peacock and Weissman suggested. Let's look at the assumptions. The first assumption is that the government will always find profitable ways to expend available funds. So we have money, the government will spend it. Just get some profitable ways of spending the money just to get political support. And then the second assumption is that citizens are mostly not willing to accept higher taxes than they used to pay. So in the past, we were paying 10 Ghana cedis. If you try to increase the tax, they will not be willing to do so. So they just don't want to pay taxes that are higher than what they used to pay in the past. Okay, and then the government too must be responsive to the wishes of their citizens. So whatever the citizens want, that is what you have to do. Okay, that is what you have to do. So these are the assumptions that we are holding now. Now let's take T star to be the tax burden that the people feel like they can bear. Okay, so if we have balanced budgets, then the government spending at this particular time, so let's take it to be a year, should be equal to the tax at that year, the tax that the people are willing to pay. But in actual sense, the government will always desire to spend more than what it takes from tax. So GT will be greater than the T star. But just know that the people who are not willing to pay any tax, that is more than the tax that they want to pay. So in the current state T, this was a tax that we're paying. But now, assuming in the next period, the next period will be given by T plus 1, because the current period is T. So if it's a year, we've added 1 year. Now, assuming there is a war in the second period, now because there's an upheaval, we'll have to spend more, and as a result, the citizens too have to support. So the tax and the expenditure that will be needed in the second period will be greater than the tax and the expenditure that will be that we are having now. So if in 2022 we are taking a tax of 1,000, there was no war. If we get to 2024 and there's a tax there, then the people should be willing to pay higher taxes in order to cover the expenditure. So in times of crisis, formerly unaccepted means of taxation will not be tolerated. Okay, and then more importantly, this higher tolerance will persist into the future. So now, if we get to 2024 and we are now paying 2,000 instead of the 1,000, by the time we get to 2025, we'll be accustomed to paying 2,000. If there is another war, then we'll have to shift from 2,000 again to something which is higher than 2,000. So you will see that the expenditure here is taking a form of, this a step-like feature. As we are moving on and there are upheavals, then it will just be moving up. Okay, to just be moving up. So that's it for please this one. Let me use the PowerPoint so that we'll understand it too. All right, so this is what we just spoke about. Let's look at the graphical representation. So the horizontal axis is time, and then the vertical one is talking about the government spending. Okay, so in normal times, okay, this is total spending. Total spending is the sum of so as I was saying, the total spending here under normal times, this green one is for defense, this is for civilian spending. So this is the sum of the two. Okay, so now during times of war, we will have to increase our expenditure on defense. Okay, so because of the war, we have to increase our expenditure on defense. Look at where it was. Now, this is the expenditure that we are incurring on defense. And this is civilian spending. Why is it falling now? Because now there's an increase in the expenditure on the defense. It has to be financed by taxes. At least the civilians will also have to pay some tax. That's why there's a reduction in civilian spending now during times of war. So the total spending here is going to what? Is going to increase. Then after the war, the economy will come back to normal again. So defense will come back to its previous level. Then the civilian spending can move up again. And then total spending is going to fall because of the fall in the expenditure in defense. So you see the step-like thing that the theory or the model was talking about. So whenever we have an upheaval, we see government spending moving up, and then civilian spending will have to fall because they have to pay higher taxes than before to finance the tax, the government spending. Okay. So what are some of the examples of social upheavals? Like the world wars, the First World War and the Second World War, the Great Depression, oil shocks, and all that. There's an econometric model. Okay, if you take this is the government spending, this is the coefficient of the First World War, this is the coefficient of the Second World War. These coefficients are dummy variables, which means they take either only two values, 0 and then 1. They are 0 the times where there was no war, and then during the times where the war was actually in progress. Then per the regression analysis, we want to test that the coefficients of the world wars are greater than 0. If the coefficients are greater than 0, then it means that during the years where there was war, government spending was higher than years that the war wasn't there. Okay, so having a positive coefficient for either WW1 or WW2 means that during the times of war, government spending increased. Okay, that is what the Peacock and Weissman model is about. Whenever there's a social upheaval, we expect an increase in government expenditure. So basically, that is that. But because we normally use time series data, if we don't take our time to go through all those problems that time series data has, okay, trend, serial correlation, stationarity, endogeneity, and all those ones. So for us to get a proper model, we have to correct all these time series problems just to make sure that we are getting a proper econometric model. Okay, then this is a weak version of the displacement hypothesis. The idea is basically the same, but what they are trying to show here is that we see a trend in civilian spending. See, you see that there's an increase in the spending over time. So by the time we will move from one normal times to another one, then we just see an increase in government spending. We will also see an increase in civilian spending, and we will see an increase in the total spending of the economy as well. So there's always a trend, a growth in the total spending of the economy. Okay. This is a Roman model. You don't really need this. All right. So this is where we'll end. We'll meet and then we'll go through some of the questions. All the best.